Hello everybody, welcome back to Think Outside the Board and our late December monthly update. Today I'll be talking about 10 different games, 4 games with Kickstarters that are currently running that you can go out and back right now, 3 games that I have backed since the last video, and 3 games that I've played. Unfortunately, there are no games that I've acquired this period, which is probably a good thing. I kind of welcome the times where I don't have new games coming in, but that means we'll have to be talking about 4 games, 0, 3, and 3. And right after the music. So first up today in the currently running Kickstarter section, we have Alhambra, the second edition of the Big Box. I think it's called the Alhambra Big Box second edition. Would make sense, right? That game is set to complete funding on December the 22nd. Now, Alhambra is a very basic, kind of a light to medium light game. I think you'd class it as a medium light game. And I always remember Alhambra because when I first started playing games a few years back, I was told that the sort of 4 cornerstones of modern gaming were Alhambra, Carcassonne, Ticket to Ride, and 7 Wonders, which is not a bad group. And I think there are always kind of exceptions to that, like, oh, and don't forget Dominion. Oh, and there's Splendor. But those 4 games have been out for a while. They are kind of classics of modern gaming. I think Alhambra hits its 20th anniversary in 3 years. I think it came out in 2003. So if you don't know what Alhambra is or how it plays, it's fairly simple. Players are, and first of all, you can play with 6 players, so that's pretty good for larger families that want to have, or larger groups that want to have a lot of people playing. But you're essentially selecting cards out of a market that you can take each turn, and then using those cards to buy buildings on a later turn, and then building sort of a tableau of tiles with these buildings. And then there are 3 sort of scoring rounds over the course of the game. The earliest one scores a majority for, I think, players that have a certain color of building, and it's only sort of the majority that scores. And then later on, there's a second scoring round, and during that scoring round, everybody who has the majority and then the sort of runner-up majority scores. And then at the end of the game, there's a final scoring round where there are, I forget how many majorities. I think you have to at least have one of the type of building to score. But other than that, everything's scoring. And then in each scoring round, you're also scoring your wall, because you're kind of building this little city tableau in front of you. So each player is building their own tableau, and it's kind of multiplayer solitaire in that way, but you are competing with other players both for cards and buildings. And I think this is a great game for people, families, people who are very casual gamers and just kind of getting into gaming, and maybe they've played card games and things like that, and this is kind of a nice step for them. Because, as I said, you can play it with up to 6, which is great, and I think it really shines with big groups. There's a lot of kind of fun dynamics that happen the more people that you have. It almost becomes a party game, but there's more going on strategically and tactically than a lot of party games, and it's more than just cards. But it is simple. It's this tile laying game. There's some kind of, I guess, push your luck depending on when you're going to buy things. And if you are playing at a max player count, by the time it comes back around to you after the other 5 people have played, the markets for the tiles and the cards can be very, very different. So it's a very fun light game that I think is very, very easy to teach. It's simple. People can pick it up, but there's a little more going on than in just a card game. So I think this is a great Kickstarter if you're looking for a family game right now, especially at the holidays. I'd encourage you to go check this out. It's also designed by Durkan, who his other 2 games, big games, are Shogun and Wallenstein, which are almost the same game. So this is kind of, those 3 games are kind of his big 3. And it's a solid game. It was mentioned to me in that breath with 7 Wonders, Carcassonne, and what was the other one? Ticket to Ride for a reason. These are just solid games that have withstood the test of time. Now, it's not the new shiny, it is a 20-year-old game. It does have new art, and if you get this new Big Box edition, you're getting all 6 expansions boxed in, and some extra promos that Queen Games calls Queenies. So you can get some extra stuff, and you're getting a whole big package. But it's a good, solid, lightweight game, I think, for introductory and casual gamers. And that completes funding on the 22nd. Then on the 23rd is a newer game that's called Momiji. And I believe that the company making this and the team behind it, this is kind of a first game. Now, it's essentially kind of like a card game, and it sort of reminds me of like Lost Cities or Jaipur in that way. It's not a 2-player game though. It is up to a 4-player game. And essentially you're taking these cards, these leaf cards, and you're building sort of like stacks of different colors. And some of them have acorn icons on them. And if you ever place 2 cards next to each other that both have acorn icons in the matching corners, you will collect an acorn icon. And those can be used to activate certain powers and break rules a little bit. But this is a very simple, very light game. You're essentially creating these stacks of leaves by number. So you kind of want to get in as many lower numbers as you can. And then once your stack reaches the number 3, you're kind of done with that stack. So it starts at 0, and you can always play the same number or a higher number. And then you also have a little tableau of kind of like player power cards. The art on it reminds me, for the leaf cards, kind of like Arboretum, and then for the kind of player power cards, like Kanagawa a little bit, which is sort of a Japanese tableau building game. Well, I should say it's a tableau building game which has art that's kind of Japanese themed art. So in this game, the leaves are very brightly colored, beautiful cards, and then the other cards kind of have Japanese themed art. But it's a light game, and looks fun, simple. It's not super heavy, but looks like a bright, beautiful, quick playing game. So, and that funds on the 23rd. Then on the 30th of December is the new Vindication campaign, which is called Vindication Board Game and Chronicles Expansion, I believe. And you can get all the old stuff if you've missed it, over the past couple Kickstarters, including promos and things. They also had, a couple months ago on their website, a special kind of package. I think it was called the Wintertide package. There was like a bundle and there were some promos. And the bundle included a big neoprene mat and some other extras. And then there was kind of a promo pack. So you can get that stuff through this Kickstarter as well. And then this Kickstarter is focusing on the Chronicles expansion. And if you've never played Vindication, it's by a great new company called Orange Nebula. And to date, they've done Vindication. They've done a Vindication expansion called Leaders and Alliances. And then this very cool new space game called Unsettled, where every game you may be playing with a different planet, so the rules may change. And that game has yet to be delivered. But their production value and their component quality, the visual kind of style of their art, everything is off the charts. This is probably one of my favorite companies producing games visually. Even though they're so young, everything that they've been doing has just been amazing. And it makes me immediately put them in company with games like Eagle Gryphon when they're doing the really nice Lacerda games. Chip Theory Games, who does Too Many Bones and Cloudspire, and Mind Clash, has done like Cerebria, Anacria, Tricarian, all these games, and Perseverance Castaway Chronicles, which is another Kickstarter that Mind Clash has been working on and is going to be delivered next year. But all of these games just have this amazing, gorgeous art, and Vindication is among them. Now, the gameplay is very kind of kitchen sink, point salad-y scoring. It gives you a lot of things that you can do. It has to do with tile placement and visiting different buildings, building up different aspects of your character. There's kind of card play. There are cubes that you can transform on your player map from potential to influence to conviction, and then you can use the different levels of cubes to do two different things. The kind of baseline cubes are the primary color ones, and they give you certain powers and allow you to do certain things. But then you can convert them into, green, orange, and purple cubes, which are sort of harder to come by because they take a few more steps to obtain them, to kind of assemble them. And so the actions that you can take with them and the cards that you can get with them and sort of the locations that you can visit with those cubes are sort of more powerful and can score more points. And I've played base game Vindication several times, and I've heard, like, the biggest criticisms I've heard about it is that it's unbalanced and certain things can score you more points. And that's just not true. Yes, it's true that they can score you points immediately in a big way, but the more you play the game, the more you become aware of different strategies that you can employ. And I really think that if you sort of are on top of the game and kind of the more you know the game, there are always things that you can do in other paths that you can take to be, a competitor. And to talk a little bit about the sort of history of Vindication, there is this kind of thematic story behind Vindication that you are a scum. There are even these bags that the cubes come in the game, and it's called the scum bag. So you are a scum who has been cast overboard as punishment in this fantasy universe, and you've washed up on this island. And you're going around this island trying to redeem yourself. It's kind of the theme of the game. Now, I don't know how prevalent a lot of people may think that theme is. Like, it does feel a little bit tacked on. It's not necessarily implemented into the gameplay that much. I mean, it's there if you want to let your mind run wild. But I think other people might argue that it's sort of just a tacked on theme and it's not super strong. So the Chronicles expansion seems to be an attempt to really kind of bolster that theme. And players get character sheets, and there are certain actions that you can take with the character sheets that kind of develop your story and develop your character. And it's designed for this to be done kind of between your turns so that it's not an additional step. But when, the turns are going around the table and other people are doing their turns, you can kind of make choices on this character sheet, between your turns. And these choices will affect your character in sort of a narrative way and add sort of a deeper theme and more narrative elements to the gameplay. And there are also kind of events that can come out as a result of this stuff that may affect you or everyone in the game. For me, I don't really need to dive too much deeper into that because I love Orange Nebula so much, and I love what they've done with Vindication in the past. So sometimes, you just sort of are like, okay, I'm sold, just give it to me. I'll look at it more deeply when I get it. And to some degree, that's what I'll do, but I felt like I needed to know something about it if I wanted to back it and also talk about it. But in a nutshell, I think that's what you need to know, is that it adds in sort of a deeper level of story and narrative gameplay and underlines kind of the theme with these scums looking for their redemption. And I like Vindication a lot. I think it's a great game. And I've showed it to a lot of people, and most people I've showed it to have liked it. There have been a few people who think it's, kind of just themeless cube pusher, point salad, grab bag of mechanics. And I'm like, yeah, that's why it's good. So, I mean, it depends on your personal taste. But for those types of games, it's beautiful. It's very well executed. And there is a high level of artistry behind this game. And I'm just really looking forward to more Vindication stuff that will kind of expand the game even more. So if you want to take a look at that is, it funds on the 30th. And that is sort of the only game in this group of 4 that is sort of a heavier game. Although I wouldn't call Vindication a heavy game, maybe medium heavy. Maybe maybe even medium. But I think if I had to class it medium light or medium heavy, it would be medium heavy. Whereas Alhambra and Momiji are definitely light to medium light, as is the last game I'm going to be talking to you about, which is Winter Queen. Now, Winter Queen is kind of an abstract game. There's sort of a central board where you can place these gems, and depending on how you place gems, sort of on what colors and on the board, you will then collect little scrolls. And the scrolls each kind of have two spells on it. So the scrolls look like an open book, and there's a place to place more gems, one on each side of these little tiles that look like open books. And there's a spell on one side and a spell on the other. And so after you've accumulated these spell books, I think you can have up to 3 at a time. On your turn, instead of placing a cube out on the board, you may be placing instead of placing a gem out on the board, you may be placing a gem on the spell books. And then when you have a gem on each side of your spell book, you can activate those spells, and those spells will trigger a point scoring situation on the board. And often, I think, if you're making a decision on what you're buying based on the board situation, then you likely will want to place your gems on the scroll shortly after you've acquired it to score it, because the board situation could change. So the spells that you've acquired may not score so well if you let a lot of time go by. And that's kind of like the gameplay and the puzzle of that game. And then when all of the, I believe the gems come out of the gem draw bag, that's when the game ends. So it's sort of a medium light, abstract, I guess it wouldn't be set collection. It's more of a tile placement game and sort of a power triggering game. I don't know if there's really a word for that, but I'd say abstract and I guess area control influence. But it looks solid. It looks solid if anyone's looking for another kind of like lighter abstract game with kind of some tactical choices and some kind of fun different mechanics with these scoring opportunities that you can trigger with gems. That brings us to the end of the section. It's going to be a shorter video this week just because, Kickstarter in December is pretty dead. There aren't as many games up. And if you've been checking out my website at Think Outside the Board, which I constantly update with the Kickstarters that have been premiering each day, the previous day, it's been a little dead lately because there just are not that many games coming out on Kickstarter right now during the holidays. So, short video. The second section of this video is usually the acquired games, but I have no new acquired games this period. So we're going to skip ahead to the third section, which is the games that I've backed since the last video. And I'm not going to talk about any of these in depth too much because I've talked about them more in previous videos when they were running on Kickstarter. I backed Nemo's War, which is a very interesting looking exploration game. It has to do a lot with cards and things. It can play up to 4 players, but everything I've heard about it is that it's best played as like a kind of solo solitaire game along the lines of like maybe the Seventh Continent or Robinson Crusoe. But Nemo's War is not a campaign game, so every time you play it, you're just going to be playing a standalone adventure. But the goals that you play in that game and the events that kind of happen are going to be highly randomized. So there's a lot of replay value in it, and people love it. It's one of the most talked about solo games that I know of, along with some of those others and things like Mage Knight, and some people solo Too Many Bones. First Martians, but that's sort of like a cousin of Robinson Crusoe, and people tend to, I think, prefer Robinson Crusoe. I think they find the theme more accessible and the game itself more accessible. But anyway, this game is up there with those games as being this kind of top echelon of solo games. So it's something I really wanted to check out. And it has amazing Ian O'Toole art now that we're into the second edition with it. And I'm just looking forward to it. Looks like a great game. The Pursuit of Happiness, which is a worker placement game that thematically bears a lot of similarity to that old game, Life, the Game of Life. You're using cards and you're taking actions and you're kind of like living out a character's life, which makes it a lot different from other worker placement games. There's kind of this simulation aspect to it, kind of like The Sims. And your character will die by the end of this game, and you're kind of balancing sort of rewards in life, like relationships, good jobs, kind of material things, with other forms of happiness, and then trying to balance that with not taking too much stress, because the stress will kill you early in the game. A lot of stress will kill you early in the game, although you are going to die no matter what. But it's this very interesting worker placement game that has this, kind of real life theme, although it has kind of very neat cartoony art. And it's a differently themed worker placement game than anything else out there. It's not just Vikings. There are real people worker placement games, and this is one of them. So I backed that one. And finally, I also backed the Transcontinental, which is by a new designer. He's also the artist on it. His name is Glenn Dresser. It's a train game, but it's a worker placement game, and it's got this weird kind of mechanic going on that I haven't really seen before, where the train goes one way, and then people kind of bid on sort of tiles, and the tiles will then come off the board, and then the train will turn around and go back to the start, and then it'll keep making these circuits, and each time it does, it's going to go farther, because these tiles that are kind of preventing it, from going further to the left each time will come out, and players will acquire them. And while the train is moving, there are kind of worker placement spaces on the top and the bottom of the track, and players, depending on where they've placed their workers, will be able to take actions from both sides of the tracks. And there's probably some funny joke to be made in there about both sides of the tracks, but I'm just going to keep going. And there's a lot of overlap too. So sometimes there might be like a top location that lines up with several locations on the bottom. So there's ways that you can hit kind of two locations at once and pair the top location with different bottom locations. And in general, I tend to like that kind of variability in games when they give you kind of different options and things to choose from, and then you are able to adjust your strategy mid-game based on how you're doing, what you're doing, and how and what other players are doing. And it just looks kind of very, very unique for a train game, and unlike anything I've really seen before. And I also thought it would be a game that my fiance, Kristen, would really like. So those were the 3 games that I backed this period. And finally, the 3 games that I've played since the last video. First up is Fossilis. Fossilis is by Kids Table Board Games. Fossilis is by a new designer, David Alberto Diaz, and it has art by Josh Capel and Apolline Etienne. And it's a really cool looking game. Essentially, you're digging dinosaur bones, and the game comes with this kind of plastic tray, and you randomly fill it up with all these bones you're going to be digging for. There's kind of a cover that you can put over it, and you shake it so they bounce around a little bit, hopefully move around. And then you kind of set up a bunch of tiles on the top of the board, and there's different kinds of tiles. There's sand, there's stone, and clay, I believe. And so you've got these little meeples that are moving around on the board, and you try to push tiles off. And as you do this, you're uncovering these pits of bones. And with the tiles that you've pushed off the board, you're able to buy cards, tools, and supplies. Sometimes they allow you to take specific actions on your next turn, or whenever you decide to use them. They can give you end-game scoring points. They can also give you more supplies. And you're going to be using all of that stuff to purchase dinosaur cards. And the idea is that you're constructing or reconstructing dinosaurs, dinosaur skeletons from fossils. And if you score a dinosaur card perfectly, meaning you get all the bones involved, you're going to score a very high amount of points. But you can also score them imperfectly for, just a smaller number of the bones. And the reason that you may want to do that is because at the end of the game, you're also going to score all these different points for different icons that are on the dinosaur cards. So anytime that you have more than 3 of an icon across your different cards, you're going to score points for that. You're also going to score points for whoever has the most of each icon. If you are able to collect all 9 of the icons, you're going to score 12 points for that. So there's definitely a lot of things going on in the game. There's kind of like the movement mechanics on the dig pit and how you're acquiring tiles, and you can push other players off the board as well if you want to be mean, and then they have to kind of expend energy to get back on the board. Sometimes if there's not a tile for them to get onto the board they need to spend more energy to put a tile on the board. So you can be a little mean if you want, but there is definitely kind of like a puzzle, a logistical puzzle in navigating these bones or navigating the dig pit and extracting these bones. But then there's also a game going on with sort of the cards that you're acquiring and then the dinosaurs that you're assembling and how you're choosing to either construct them perfectly or construct them for their icons and trying to kind of score all these set collection points at the end of the game. And it's a really good game. There's a lot of mechanics going on, again, that gives you the opportunity to pursue different paths for points. And then if something's not working or there's problems, you can kind of shift and pursue other things. I only really have two caveats with the game. One is that you can't really see the dinosaur bones unless you're standing over it looking down, which could potentially lead people to kind of bonk heads. So just something to be aware of. The other thing is that it's being sort of marketed as a kids game, and it's called Kids Table Board Gaming. And I think that there's enough going on in this game that there's a complexity level to it that may be beyond at least what little kids can play. So they may love the look of the game because it's pretty and it's very tactile and it's got all these fun pieces. So I think little kids, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, they're going to look at this game and think it's really neat and want to play with it, right? But they're not going to be able to play with that game yet. And then older kids who are ready for this game, and they don't have to be that old. I mean, there are plenty of really smart kids out there. But I think a kid that is ready for Fossilis is also ready for a lot of other games. There's no reason that kid can't be playing Raiders of the North Sea and, other games in the kind of medium light, even medium heavy section. So I consider Fossilis to be more of a very, I want to say, with all the plastic pieces and very kind of tactile, attractive looking Euro game. Maybe it's a little bit on the light side for a Euro game, but I'd class it more as a Euro game than a kids game. Although, like I said, kids are going to have a lot of fun with it as long as they're at the level that they can kind of grasp all the mechanics. And I think for some kids, there may be like one or two mechanics too many in the game. But there is another thing about the game that actually does appeal to kids, is that Kids Table Board Game has been really, really good about including things in the rule book, ways that you kind of make things easier for kids. Like there are some tiles that you can acquire in the game that can be kind of mean and have a take that element to that. And they're marked with a little blue frowny face. So if you're playing with little kids who might be really upset by an action like that being taken against them, you can very easily take those tiles out because they have this blue, frowny face on it. So you're gonna notice if that's in the game. And there are a bunch of other little things in there that are also kind of suggestions for ways to adjust the difficulty level of the game. So I think in that sense, especially because it's being marketed as a kid's game, I think what they've done there is really commendable. And I think most parents probably can, if they have a kid that maybe doesn't quite work with yet, they can probably find ways to kind of tweak it with the suggestions in the rule book. So I liked Fossilis a lot. I really liked it, and I'm definitely looking forward to playing it some more. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's going to be a keeper for a while. I have also played Hero Realms, and let's talk a little bit about Hero Realms. Hero Realms is kind of one of several big deck builders, I think, that followed in the heels of Dominion. So you kind of had Ascension, you had Thunderstone, Quest. Well, that's its current iteration, but there were other versions of Thunderstone, and Aeon's End. And Thunderstone, Quest, and Aeon's End are kind of my two go-to deck builders. But I'd heard really good things about Hero Realms and Star Realms, and so I wanted to acquire one of them and kind of give it a shot. So the thing that I found out about Hero Realms is if you buy just the base game, it's kind of just a card battler. So you're fighting another person. And then you can buy kind of class packs. So there's a cleric, fighter, ranger, thief, and wizard class pack. And that allows you to be fighting with each other rather than just with generic decks, with kind of class-specific decks. They even put out a couple of boss decks, but that is not to be used cooperatively. The boss decks, there's a dragon deck and a lich deck, and those are for players to use. So if you're playing with one of those, it can become sort of a one versus many situation where you could have a bunch of players, I guess up to 5, playing all the different classes, and then another player playing the lich or the dragon, and again, fighting against everybody. And then Hero Realms took the next step, and they did a Kickstarter campaign for the Ruins of Thandar, which was sort of a cooperative campaign game. And in the Ruins of Thandar, there are essentially 3 different scenarios. So when you play that game, you're going to fight 3 different bosses. The bosses you fight may change from play to play. It's a little bit like a choose-your-own-adventure book. So you're going to, depending on certain narrative choices you make, you're going to have different bosses for the second and the third fights. Actually, the second and the 3B fights, because the third fight is kind of 2 bosses, and one's always going to be the same, and then the second one could be 4 different bosses depending on how the first part of that fight plays out. So I really do like the cooperative game. The problem is, I think that my fiance Kristen, who I'm playing with right now because we're in a pandemic, she does not really like competitive games, especially games where it's literally kind of one-on-one kind of fighting games. So that kind of throws out that half of the game for me to some degree, right? So now I'm kind of only looking at this cooperative element. And there was a sequel to the Ruins of Thandar called The Lost Village, and that has kind of more of what the Ruins of Thandar does. So I'm not sure how many scenarios are in that game, and maybe 1 or 2 more. But again, like, who you're fighting is going to be dependent on sort of narrative choices that you make. And my fiance really likes the cooperative side of Hero Realms. The problem is there's just not that much material there. Like, even though I feel like they've designed it really well so that when you replay it, you can play as different characters and you're going to fight different bosses, there's only 3 encounters, which feels like almost like a mini expansion or a very, very small expansion. So I think if you're going to compare it with something like Dragonfire or other games like Aeon's End, there's kind of so much narrative story packed into Aeon's End in like one box. And there's like the base game and like 3 other big box expansions, plus they've got a legacy game and a lot of mini expansions. That with something like Aeon's End, there's just so much room to run. Dragonfire as well, because they put out all these mini expansions. But for Hero Realms, it's very limited. And so I think it's going to be good for people who want to kind of have both. Like, they want to have a cooperative campaign element there if they want to play it, but they're still going to be playing the kind of 1 versus 1 or 1 versus many card battling. Like, that's going to be a big part of their gameplay. So for someone who wants the whole package, Hero Realms has it all. But for someone who wants more of the cooperative element, the offerings in Hero Realms, while well designed, are very kind of thin. So I know we're going to be playing through The Lost Village. We may replay it a couple times, and Kristen's really, really enjoying it. But I think once I break out other games like Aeon's End, Hero's Realm will probably get left behind and end up being sold. So whether or not it's a game for you, I think really kind of depends if you want that kind of whole package. If you want to get a little bit of everything, you know, the ability to fight and the campaign, and you want a system that can kind of do both, it's a good thing to have. If you're looking for something that's very campaigny, then maybe try a different deck builder. And if you only want the card battling, then you don't even need to buy the campaigny stuff. You can just kind of focus on the card battling stuff. Okay, so that was my experience with Hero Realms. We had a really, really good time with it, a lot of fun. I just don't know how long it's going to last, sort of like in the replayability area. And then the final game that we played was Paradise Lost. Now, this is interesting, Paradise Lost, to me, because it's not a game you really see around much. I remember when it was on Kickstarter, and I even profiled it for my website, Think Outside the Board, as a Kickstart This. But I don't know anybody who backed it, except for Derek Funkhauser. Hi, Derek. Well, I don't know that he backed it. He somehow acquired it at a certain point. And he was living out here in Los Angeles where I am. And then he, this year, was sort of redeployed and the Funkhausers had to move. And I inherited a bunch of his games. And so I finally got Paradise Lost to the table. And Paradise Lost is a fun little game, actually. It sort of can fill a niche as a party game. It plays up to 5. And the gameplay is essentially Tokaido, or if you know Parks better, Parks. So Tokaido or Parks meets Clue. So it's a deduction game, but you are sort of walking down a path, much like in Tokaido, where you're hitting different locations, and the locations that you travel to will give you sort of different resources, occasionally different actions that you can take. And then every so often you'll hit this kind of stopping point. In Tokaido, that's where you kind of like sleep at the inn and eat some meals, and everyone kind of like resets and then they move on again. So that happens in Paradise Lost as well, but primarily the function is that you are trying to figure out which sort of fabled villain and which fabled weapon. See, I told you it was like Clue, is in an envelope and is sort of like trying to, I guess, take over Fabledom. I don't remember the actual specifics of the overview of the game. It is fantasy themed, and you're playing all these, kind of fantasy characters like Little Red Riding Hood, Billy Goat Gruff, Alice in Wonderland. So each game you're trying to figure out the kind of, just like Clue, the who, the with what, and the where. And the who and the with what are just like Clue. So you're going to have kind of sheets, and if you're playing a deduction game, where you're trying to you get a certain number of cards in the beginning of the game, you know that those are not the cards that are that are the threat to Fairyland, and you need to figure out the other ones so that at the end of the game you can correctly guess what the correct cards are. The one thing that's a little different from Clue in this sense is that the location. So instead of the location being this mechanic as well, the location has kind of an area control mechanic where you're going to be placing these tiles out in the center of the board, indicating that like, oh, he's not here, or it could be here. And each player in the beginning of the game gets a tile and that has a location on it. And so you want to make the villain in your location that you have. And you do that by placing out certain tiles to specify that, and then placing these seeker cubes on the tile to lock them in, or spending even more seeker cubes if you want to unlock a tile that somebody else placed. So there's kind of this little area control mechanic going for the third aspect, the third kind of unknown thing, the location. And the way that works out is that when you sort of finish the game, wherever that majority falls, whoever has that matching location, that is the player who gets to then first check to see if they can correctly guess the character and the weapon. And then leading up to that, you're doing this kind of Tokaido gameplay. And each time you stop at one of these kind of rest areas, everyone's going to get to look at one card that's there, and that allows them to cross off something else off of their deduction checklist. Now, it's a simple game. I don't go in for simple games as much as heavy games. And it's obviously got its roots in games that are fairly well known. I think everybody knows Clue. A lot of people know Tokaido, and Tokaido is somewhat similar to Parks if you've ever played Parks. So it shouldn't be hard to teach, and it's not that difficult, and there's, I think, kind of enough fun in the game that it does, I wouldn't call it a party game, but it can have that party game type atmosphere, I think, with a group of 5 people. So I think I'm going to keep the game for now. I probably, when sort of the pandemic ends and people can game publicly in larger groups, I think it'll be a really fun game to play with the game group a few times, and I'll kind of see how it goes. I don't personally need too many kind of lighter games on my shelf, so for me it's always a contest to kind of pick what stays and what goes. I feel like I need a smaller number of lighter games. But for now, it's in there. It's in the mix, and we'll kind of see the reception that it has with different people in my gaming group. I think the reaction to that game, the response to it, will determine whether I eventually kind of keep it or not, because I could go either way on it. And I think the fun to be had in that group is going to be with a group and the dynamic of that group. So in that sense, I guess it probably does have a lot in common with sort of simpler deduction games like Coup and the Resistance and Secret Hitler and those games. Personally, I don't like those games very much. So for me, I guess this could take the place in my gaming collection of that sort of game. Because I like that there's a little more going on. There's board play, and I like the deduction element that's kind of more clue-like, where you're trying to figure out these things. And that is it. That is it for the section. That is it for the video. I will be back in a couple more weeks for another video in early January that does all these things that I just did again. And we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen with that video, because it'll be on the heels of December. So again, it may be kind of like a lighter video with fewer games. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, I would really appreciate you liking and subscribing. It helps me grow the channel, which is something I obviously really need to do right now. And then if you also want to be notified when I publish future videos, you can hit the alarm bell as well. So thank you for your time. I hope I gave you some useful information, and those are 4 Kickstarters that we talked about at the top: Alhambra, Winter Queen, Vindication Chronicles, and Momiji. If any of those appeal to you, you can go check them out right now. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you soon.